The final update to Iceborne is here, and with it comes the toughest challenge in the game. Fatalis the Black Dragon will test even the best of hunters. So I'm Darcblade with an Anti-Fatalis build for the Darcblade in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Now as always, an anti-build or counter build is made to take on a specific monster in the game. And whilst in all honesty, Fatalis can be taken on with pretty much any settled build, the builds featured in this series are aimed at making the hunt more manageable. When it comes to the Darcblade, you have two options. You either go for strong elemental damage and make use of the Savage Axe mode, or you go for high raw attack and make use of impact file charge blades. Both work fine, but for me personally, I found the impact and raw attack approach the easier option when taking on Fatalis. You just have to make sure you're looking for openings to perform the super amped elemental discharge. So for the Anti-Fatalis Darcblade build, you'll need the Brachydium Helm Beta, Brachydium Mel Beta, Brachydium Braces Alpha, Brachydium Folds Beta, Brachydium Greaves Beta, and I'm using an Attack Charm 5. For my weapon, I'm using the Safi Bind Shield that has only attack increases as its awakened ability, so we can increase our raw attack. And when it comes to augmentations, I've gone for a health regen augmentation and attack increase augmentation. Of course, you could pretty much get away with using any of the Safi weapons if you so wish. I personally went for the paralysis one, as if you're able to paralyze Fatalis, it leaves it open for a big hit. Anyway, as for the mantles, I'd recommend going for the Temporal Mantle and Rocksteady Mantle. So when it comes to the jaws, you've got a few to play around with. So first of all, I've gone for Destroyer jaws for the Partbreaker skill. I've then gone for Protection jaws for Divine Blessing, Artillery jaws for the Artillery skill, Attack jaws for attack boost, Charger jaws for the Focus skill, Vitality jaws for health boost, an Iron War jaw for a point in the guard skill, Magazine jaw for capacity boost, a Sharp jaw for protective polish, and a Fortitude jaw for the Fortify skill. The jaws on the mantles, I've simply gone for Heavy Artillery for the Heavy Artillery skills. So if you've done what I've done here, you should have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you're on a hunt and taking all your relevant consumables. You have a raw attack of 1318 with a decent chunk of white sharpness. You have 10% affinity, which can be 60% when you're taking into account weakness exploit and you're attacking monster weak points that have been tenderized through clutch claw attacks first. This can be even higher at 80% when you take into account the agitator buff as well. You have a paralysis rating of 120. This is quite low to be honest, but it can still lead to Fatalis being paralyzed at least once during a hunt. You have impact files, and when it comes to your defense, you have an okay defense of 1071. That is strong against fire, thunder and dragon, but unfortunately weak to water and ice. Anyway, when it comes to the skills, first of all you have attack boost at level 7. Attack boost is a skill that increases the raw attack value of a build, and thus it increases our overall damage, not only for our sword and axe attacks, but also our impact files as well. Additionally, when attack boost is at level 4 or above, it also provides us a bonus 5% base affinity. You have agitator level 7, a wonderful buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged. When this happens and the buff kicks in, you'll gain increased raw attack as well as increased affinity. Anyway, you'll have artillery at level 5, increasing the damage of our files. These are the explosions that occur after the super amped elemental discharge, or when you're in Savage Axe mode, or when you've powered up your sword. As always, remember with the Darcblade, file bursts cannot crit, so we don't have to worry about affinity, hence the reason that this build doesn't really focus on affinity and focuses instead more on raw attack. Anyway, you have health boost level 3, allowing our health to get to that maximum of 200. You have weakness exploit level 3, which is a useful skill that gives us increased affinity whenever we're attacking monster weak points. And should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, this increase to our affinity is even greater. Weakness exploit at level 3 can potentially provide us an extra 50% affinity. Anyway, you have focus level 3, which is a useful skill for the Darcblade as it allows us to charge up our files more quickly and thus perform the super amped elemental discharge more quickly as well. And as with this build, that is our primary attack and source of damage. The more we can perform it, the better. Anyway, you have Partbreaker level 3. Partbreaker is a skill that allows us to break monster body parts more easily. And with the Fatalis hunt, this is very useful. When taking on Fatalis, you'll want to break its horns, especially by phase 3 of the hunt. If you don't break the horns by then Fatalis's flames will turn blue and can pretty much one-shot any hunter. Partbreaker should allow us to break the horns should we get an opportunity to attack the head, allowing us to survive the later phases. Anyway, you have Divine Blessing level 3, which is a useful defensive skill that gives us a chance at taking reduced damage when we take a hit from a monster. However, this isn't a guaranteed reduction in damage, it's just a chance at taking reduced damage. Next up is Fortify level 1, which is a useful skill when taking on tough hunts. Whenever we faint, we'll come back with increased raw attack and defense. This buff can be applied up to 2 times. Anyway, you have Capacity Boost level 1, which increases the amount of files this build has. You have Guard level 1, which slightly increases how effective we are when it comes to blocking monster attacks. However, with this build, it kind of isn't needed in some respects when taking on Fatalis, as pretty much all the monster's attacks will knock us back quite a bit. Normally, against most other monsters, you can put a point into Guard, and with a charged up shield, it will allow us to pretty much block most monster attacks and follow it up with a Guard reaction. So whether you replace this is up to you. Next up is Protective Polish level 1, which is a useful skill that allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. And as we only have a little bit of white sharpness, this will allow us to keep it longer. However, it should be noted when it comes to the file bursts, these are not affected by your sharpness gauge, so even if you drop down into blue sharpness or even green, your file bursts will still be dealing a lot of damage. And then finally, when you're wearing your mantles, you'll have Heavy Artillery level 2. Which increases the damage of the heavy artillery in Trade Castle by 100%. So whenever a piece of artillery is available, make sure you're wearing a mantle before firing it so you can deal the most damage to Fatalis and potentially stun it. But that's about it for the skills. As for the set bonuses, we'll have 2 of them, which is both attached to the Brachydios wheel. First of all is the Agitator's Secret, which allows us to get the Agitator skill from a base level 5 to a maximum of level 7. And finally, for wearing 4 pieces, you have the Artillery Secret, allowing us to get the Artillery skill from level 3 to a maximum of level 5. So there we have it, that is the Chargeblade build I recommend for taking on Fatalis. Obviously, like I said, it favours the super amped elemental discharge spam combined with impact files for maximum damage. Having artillery as well as a high raw attack means that our file should be doing a lot of damage to the monster, and it also means that we don't have to worry about Fatalis's defenses or elemental resistances. The only tricky thing is actually pulling off the super amped elemental discharge, which has quite a bit of a wind up animation, so timing your attacks is crucial. But anyway, let's move on to the pros and cons, as every build in Monster Hunter World Iceborne has them. First of all, when it comes to pros, is the build has very high raw attack, which leads to high amounts of damage, as well as high damaging file bursts. On top of that, because this build is primarily focused around file bursts, it means that we don't have to worry about affinity too much. Whilst yes, critting the monster for the first part of the super amped elemental discharge can add to the damage, the file bursts of the super amped elemental discharge are what we are more interested in. And then finally, when it comes to the pros, this build has quite a few quality of life skills. From Health Boost, Focus, Part Breaker, Divine Blessing to Fortify. These will all add to the hunt, making it feel a little bit more easier than it is. But unfortunately there are cons to this build. First of all, this build does lack when it comes to affinity, but as mentioned before, because we are primarily relying on the file bursts, we don't have to worry about affinity too much. And the other con is, unfortunately, there is no evasion skills on this build. We have to instead rely on blocking monster attacks, which can be risky, especially if you're low on stamina. But if you're looking for a Chargeblade build to take on Fatalis, I can strongly recommend this one. So there we have it. That is the build I'd recommend for taking on Fatalis with the Chargeblade. Now of course, as you farm the monster more and more, you'll get Fatalis weaponry and gear, which is some of the best in the game and should allow you to take on the hunt a little bit more easily. But until then, this build will work just fine. So until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you an Anti-Fatalis build for the Chargeblade in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.